In the 7th century, a movement just exploded out of Arabia, and in a span of a single lifetime, it completely redrew the map of the world. We're talking about the Islamic Conquests, one of history's fastest, most transformative events. But you know what? It's also one of the most misunderstood. So how did it really happen? Okay, let's get into it. First, we've got to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of what we're talking about here. This wasn't some slow, gradual creep. It was a political and social tidal wave that just slammed into two of the world's greatest empires and changed them forever. Okay, now just look at this timeline. This is where it gets absolutely wild. In 622, the movement is just this tiny community in Medina. 10 years later, just 10, all of Arabia is united. 4 years after that, the massive armies of the Byzantine and Sasanian empires are shattered. And by 651, less than 30 years after uniting Arabia, the Sasanian Empire is just gone. This new power controls everything from Egypt all the way to eastern Iran. The speed is just, well, it's breathtaking.
And that right there is the central puzzle. Western Arabia didn't have a big established state. It had no large professional army, no massive economic base to pull from. So how on earth did this happen? How did they organize a movement that could overwhelm two of the most powerful and long-lasting empires on the planet?
Well, for a long time, the answer seemed pretty straightforward. It was based on what you might call the military model. So the traditional view kind of goes like this. A brand new, exclusive religion called Islam just appears on the scene. Its super zealous followers, united by their faith, go out and conquer huge territories, forcing their rule on the local non-Muslim populations. It's a simple, powerful story, right? But it's got some serious problems. People have thrown a few ideas out there to explain the why. Greed for plunder? Yeah, okay. But pastoralists had been reading for plunder for centuries. So why did it suddenly become this organized, world-changing movement right then? Climate change forcing people to move? The evidence shows highly organized armies, not a trickle of refugees. And yeah, for sure, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires were exhausted from fighting each other. But that explains their weakness. It doesn't explain the believers' incredible strength and unity. And this idea of an Arab national movement? The earliest sources barely even mention Arabs. They talk almost exclusively about religious identity. So, you see, none of these explanations really solve the puzzle. And this is where a more recent theory, pioneered by the historian Fred Donner, completely flips the script. It asks us to totally rethink what this movement actually was at the very beginning. So this theory argues that the initial group didn't see themselves as creating some new, separate religion called Islam. Nope. They called themselves believers, mu'minun in Arabic. And this was an ecumenical movement. That means it welcomed all pious monotheists, including righteous Christians and Jews. Anyone who believed in one God and tried to live by his laws, whether those laws came from the Torah, the Gospels, or the Quran. Their goal wasn't forced conversion. It was to build a new, God-guided political order for everyone. And this chart just lays out the difference perfectly. The traditional view, it sees an exclusive new religion fighting outsiders. The revisionist view sees an inclusive movement for monotheistic reform. In one, the goal is conversion. In the other, it's about righteous living. This huge shift from conquerors versus the conquered to an inclusive community helps explain that incredible speed. And, this is key, it helps explain why there's almost no archaeological evidence of widespread destruction or social chaos. For many local people, these guys might not have seemed like hostile foreign invaders at all, but more like fellow monotheists creating a new, just government. And you know what? We actually have contemporary evidence that backs this up. Here we have a Christian chronicler writing in the late 7th century. He describes the believers' armies demanding tribute, but then he says each one could remain in whatever faith he chose. That really supports the idea that the main goal here was political expansion, not forced religious conversion. Okay, so if it started out as this inclusive, charismatic movement, how did it become the structured, conquering empire we all read about in the history books? Let's take a look at how that transformation actually happened. You see, the expansion wasn't just one single thing. It really happened in two distinct phases. First, you had that initial, explosive, charismatic burst, driven by this intense religious fire to spread God's righteous rule. But to actually manage all that success, a more structured institutional phase had to kick in. And here are the practical steps they took to make it happen. The kind of ad hoc raiding parties from Muhammad's time, they evolved into a proper standing army with a regular payroll. The caliphs started appointing governors to manage these huge new territories. And crucially, they founded new garrison towns. These weren't just army bases.
They were the new administrative hubs that kept the believers' community together in these new lands. A state was literally being born in real time.
So by the time we get to the second phase under the Umayyad dynasty, the state is pretty well established. And expansion becomes less of a spontaneous holy mission and more of a routine state policy. Campaigns were now planned out every year, almost like a form of taxation, to collect revenue, booty, and slaves to fund the growing empire and its ruling class. The motivation was shifting from pure religious zeal to the practical business of running a state. The long-term impact of these events, of course, well, it was nothing short of world-changing. This wasn't just a political reshuffling, it was the birth of an entirely new civilization. Let's just break down these long-term consequences because they are truly staggering. Look at this list. One of the world's great superpowers, the Sasanian Empire, just vanished. Poof, gone from the map. The other one, the Byzantine Empire, was cut down to a fraction of its former self. A new Arabic-speaking elite rose to power, and their language spread across this vast new territory. And while that initial movement may have been ecumenical, it created the political framework, the protective umbrella, if you will, under which Islam as we know it today would emerge and become one of the world's great faiths, kicking off a vibrant and enduring civilization. So we're left with this final question, aren't we? If we see this pivotal moment in history not as a simple story of conquest for a new religion, but as the expansion of an inclusive, pious movement that then evolved, how does that change our understanding of the origins of Islam and its relationship with other monotheistic faiths? It's a shift in perspective that really does reshape one of the most important stories in all of human history.